Well, good afternoon, everybody, or good morning, depending upon what part of the world you are in. My name is Kevin White, and I am with Unified Networking Solutions. And today we have a webinar that we're going to be discussing cybersecurity, a topic that is top of mind for just about everybody. And we have with us two experts who are going to talk us through various aspects of that cybersecurity issue. I want everybody to know that we will be taking questions at this, and so here is the agenda of what we're going to be covering for the next approximately 1 hour. The first few bullets we're going to actually hear from Justin Walker. Justin is with the Sophos. He's with the Sophos team, and we'll be talking through how and why hackers target your business, ramifications of a cyber attack, which industries are most at risk, who is using the data and why, the types of cyber threats that are out there. We're then going to have Paul O'Donnell. Paul's coming to you from the Unified team, and he's going to be talking about the role of managed services in cybersecurity, and then, of course, best practices and how you can protect yourself and your company. This is going to be using patch management Simplified, which is a great product that's out there. Everybody should know that in doing questions, they're all going to be submitted virtually. So bottom left corner of your screen should be a place where you can type in questions, and we will try and answer as many as we get. And if we can't, somebody from the Unified team will certainly follow up with you afterwards directly to try and answer your question. So feel free to type in during any point of the webinar a question you might have. So without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Justin and let him talk about how and why hackers target your business. So Justin, you there?
I am here. Can you hear me okay?
We can.
Okay, excellent. So thank you. Really appreciate it. Like Kevin said, I am Justin Walker with Sophos, and I've been an engineer with the company going on 12 years now. So I've certainly seen the industry as well as the threat change quite a bit during that time. And one of the things that we really want to focus on is kind of the threat landscape in general, how that's changing, and what that means for securing your business. So I wanted to kick things off with a couple really basic stats, but they're really important to understand. Again, I've been with Sophos 12 years, and I can remember when this number was below 50,000. That's the number of previously unseen pieces of malware that we see every single day. It's up to 400,000 now. So there is an absolute dramatic increase year over year. It's kind of staggering when you look at it in terms of the number of threats that are out there. I mean, one of the things is the more that malware providers throw out there, the more stuff eventually sticks. And it's a big business for them, just as much as it is for a legitimate company. Because of that amount that's out there in the wild, and because of polymorphism, which has shifted over the years, attacks used to change when they would copy themselves from one machine to the next. Now they change on the server side. So if everyone goes to the same malicious link, everybody gets a slightly different version of that file, and that means trouble for pattern-based detection. But that also means 75% of malware is only ever found within one particular organization. What hits company A is a different version of it at company B across the street. So that's a really tough proposition if we look at it from an old school way of protection. The other thing to consider is, again, because of that exponential increase in malware, Sophos has been in the business since 1984. We've seen more than a quarter of all malware ever has just come out in the last 12 months. And again, that exponential increase is a really tough thing to keep up with if you keep fighting things with traditional old school methods. So we've got to look at newer ways to prevent and protect while still allowing things to function and let people do their jobs. The evolution of endpoint threats has changed quite a bit over the years, and depending on how long you've been in computer security, I know that I remember all of these, but the damage that was associated with particular threats back in the day was really due to the fact that there wasn't good methods for cleaning things up. Users weren't aware of any of these particular threats. But the big shift that we saw was around 2007 to 2009. In 2007, the Zeus Trojan was unleashed on the world, and that was a very popular or unpopular, depending on what side of the fence you're on, banking Trojan. And that alone was a multi-billion-dollar industry. But around 2009, we saw the introduction of Polypack, or basically crimeware as a service. So just like any other company, now malware writers started offering malware as a service. You could pay some money and basically have a functioning product, just like any other product, that could target people. And that led to quite a few advancements in the form of remote access Trojans, exploits as a service, and then the Locky ransomware in 2016, which in itself, that one variant of ransomware, was a billion-dollar industry. Now, from a perspective of, what are the ramifications to a company, there's a couple of things that have shifted a lot over the years, and one of the biggest things is that the attacks now are from within the perimeter, and they're focused on software exploits more than anything else. Petya, which just made the news yesterday, and a couple of weeks ago, the WannaCry, were both using exploits in the Windows operating system. But whether you're running that or Office or other applications like Adobe, those increasingly become the targets rather than convincing people to click on a suspicious attachment if they're not patched, if they're vulnerable. It doesn't necessarily require any user interaction for somebody to get their hooks into a system. They can just do it remotely if there are software out there that's not patched, that are available to the outside world. They're able to do some incredible damage. Ransomware alone reached $1.2 billion in damages last year. That's in actual recovery costs, maintenance, labor. That's not even including the payments that were made directly to the ransomware writers and the people that are delivering these threats, but that's the damages themselves. And the other thing that becomes a problem kind of is the lack of intelligence, and that's one of the things that I'll focus on a little bit, is something that we can help out with. Any AV product should be able to tell you the what, the where, and the when. What was the threat, where did it happen, so the user and computer, and when did it happen. But the how is a huge piece toward preventing that sort of stuff from happening in the future. So if you aren't able to identify how the threats came in, you can't make changes to prevent them from continuing to attack the network. Now, this next slide, Sophos has a cloud-managed dashboard, but unfortunately so do the malware writers. And this is what I was referencing before when we talk about crimeware as a service. This is a cloud-based dashboard for what's called a black hole exploit kit. Now, this is kind of old news, but what's interesting here is they have technical support. They have a web-managed dashboard. It's available all over the world in all different languages. And this was one of the big shifts when we saw malware start to target very particular aspects of what's available on a system. Years ago, malware would just throw everything at the wall and see what sticks. But with Black Hole and other exploit kits, they can query a machine. Your computer constantly volunteers information on how to render pages and what's available to render that content. So it will volunteer out its operating system, its browser type. Do I have things like Flash or Adobe to render content? And as a result, by sharing that information out for legitimate pages to deliver content to me, unfortunately it also tells malware writers based on that what I might be able to deliver. And now they can have more focused payloads and just deliver that one little piece. And that in itself means that I don't have to rely on, again, on throwing everything at the wall. Now a malware writer can just simply deliver that one piece of payload that's going to impact that thing that I know is vulnerable, and that in itself changes the detection mechanic quite a bit. Because now I don't have to throw that entire package out there. It's just something that can exist in a very small silo. Now, one of the biggest misconceptions that I run into, I personally am a Mac user primarily, but I run Mac, Linux, and Windows at home. Maybe I'm the exception there, but one of the things I hear again and again, I don't run Windows, so I'm safe. But there's been a drastic shift as well, too, on targeting other platforms. So just to quickly talk about that, because it is something that we definitely want to focus in on. Whoops, sorry, my presentation didn't refresh there for a moment. We've seen a dramatic increase in Linux-based malware, especially with the advent of IoT or Internet of Things devices. More and more stuff is connected to the Internet. A lot of it runs Linux, whether that's TV, your washer dryer, your oven, your thermostat. More and more of those things are available on the Internet. And as a result, this one particular variant that we saw, this threat DDoS-BI, initially arrives through a brute force attack, an SSH attack. But this is just, again, one very particular form of Linux malware over the last calendar year, and we can see kind of that dramatic uptick. So, unfortunately, Linux isn't safe in itself, but the biggest thing when it comes to Linux is often those systems are unprotected, and as a result can end up sharing malware out to other machines. So even though it isn't infected, it's volunteering that information out to other machines that are connected to it. When we look at the web in general, 80% of the malware that arrives on endpoints comes from the web, and the most common web platform to host things is unfortunately Linux and Apache. And as a result of not protecting those machines, sometimes the platforms on there, like a WordPress, can get impacted due to vulnerabilities, and then it's used to host malware out to others. Now, kind of along those same lines, Android's another platform that we need to worry about. Just as a side note, Sophos has a completely free product called Sophos Mobile Security. It's available for free on the Google Play Store, and it protects you against things like fake AV and ransomware, which are just as much of a problem on Android as they are on Windows. And unfortunately, not just in non-market apps, but also in the Google Play Store itself. So you've got to be very careful what you download. But you can kind of see over the last couple of years the total number of APKs that we analyzed versus what was malware and potentially unwanted applications. Around 2013, there was a dramatic shift where we looked at a fair number of APKs, of Android packages, and the majority of them were illegitimate, were malicious. That number stayed pretty constant in 2014, but then you can see it makes up almost half of the total population of APKs that are out there in the wild. So Android is definitely a platform to be concerned with, to make sure that you're protecting. And more, as users are more and more mobile, Android's an appealing option for them because they can get a flexible phone at the cost that they want with the features that they want. Gives you a little bit more option than, say, the iOS side, because you can pick and choose your device and your vendor and all these different options. But it also is an increasingly beneficial target for malware writers because they know people have personal information, banking information, company information on those phones. So it's a very appealing target for them to hit. And then as a Mac user, something that certainly was long in the running, but finally arrived in the form of KE Ranger, ransomware is now possible on Macs as well too. And the particular threat that we see on screen here got on to the transmission BitTorrent client. So they actually infected transmission. So users that had Gatekeeper installed, for example, it's a feature designed to only allow applications that are signed by trusted developers to install onto the Mac operating system. So you'd have to disable that previously to get something that was, more nefarious or malicious. But in this case, they hacked into transmission, used their signing certificate to modify the application and include ransomware, and then you could download transmission with ransomware included. So Macs aren't safe, Linux isn't safe, Android far from safe. So it's important that we don't just focus in on kind of the PC threat, but there's threats all over the place. One of the biggest things you can do to prevent a lot of problems is by patching, whether that's Windows Update, Mac updates, Linux, Android, iOS, you name it. There are always vulnerabilities, and by patching you reduce the attack surface, and it's one of the best things that you can do. But the concept of Patch Tuesday, in a perfect world, we're delivering those patches the second that they're available and there's no problems. But in reality, sometimes those patches come with conflicts or problems, and they can't be pushed out right away. And unfortunately, what that concept of Patch Tuesday leads to is the idea of Exploit Wednesday. Malware writers are working very fast and furious. As soon as vulnerabilities are announced and patched, they're working to exploit those vulnerabilities and get onto machines that maybe haven't had that patch deployed yet. WannaCry is a particularly good example in recent memory, as well as Petya, which used the same Eternal Blue SMB vulnerability. So if you hadn't unfortunately patched since WannaCry came out but managed to not get infected by it, Petya was there waiting in the wings to potentially infect you as well too. Now there are other methods that those particular threats can infect machines, but patching is one of the biggest things you can do to reduce the vulnerability. The space has changed a lot, especially in the last couple of years, but certainly over the last decade. Now we're seeing more advanced malware that's dynamic. We're also seeing active adversaries, so it's not just, again, spam it out to the world and see what sticks, but now you have malware writers that are specifically targeting particular organizations. They're scanning for people that might be vulnerable, for the ones that are of most interest to them, and then attacking them. And something that they're counting on is that you're going to have limited visibility. You know, that circumstance of not knowing the how did something get into my network means that I can't prevent it from happening again. If I just know that, you know, it got caught or we found it, it doesn't tell me, you know, how to prevent that sort of thing from happening in the future. And that limited visibility is something that they're counting on to continue to try and infect, you know, personal computers as well as organizations. Now, in terms of some of the ones that are most at risk, there are 5 that come up all the time, but you know, it's important to note that these are not obviously the only ones that get infected or have problems. Healthcare consistently, though, is at the top of the list. Manufacturing, financial, government, and transportation. This list is pretty consistent for the top 5 industries that are most at risk. But we also see a lot of threat to education, legal, and so on. The bottom line is anywhere where there's data to be stolen, that's something that's going to be very valuable to someone with malicious intent. So any place where PII, payment card data, anything like that might be stored, it's a particularly interesting target for malware writers. Now, one thing to consider is, you know, you don't think a lot of these organizations as being small businesses, but small businesses, unfortunately, are not immune either. So in a recent survey from a small biz website, this is basically who responded yes in a survey for either a cyber attack or a data breach in the last 12 months. And both are at 50% or above. And those are the people that are willing to admit that they had one of those problems. What we find is often the case is companies are not confident sharing that data. They may be more comfortable with it in an anonymous survey, but you can expect that, you know, if this survey is relatively accurate, that the numbers are at least that bad, if not worse. And then continuing on to the next one, we can see kind of what attacks they ran into. Now, ransomware is particularly damaging, but as you'll notice, it's pretty low on the list. But the thing to consider here too is that the web-based attacks and the phishing and the other malware attacks can eventually lead to ransomware because they become downloaders and a foot in the door for other infections to then get pulled down by those programs when they reach out to command and control centers. But again, these are this is focused specifically on small businesses. So, you know, just because you're not on that list of the 5 doesn't mean that you're immune to that. Now, as well as any organization sets up their security, there's one thing that we have to worry about time and time again, and that's the user, unfortunately. So regardless of what we do at the firewall, the encryption layer, the antivirus software, it doesn't really matter if we don't have some sort of education that can be passed down to the end users. They are the weak link in a lot of security models, unfortunately. So it's important to reduce what they can do and educate them as best as possible in order to stay protected. But again, probably the biggest thing there that we can do from a policy standpoint is limit as best as possible what users can do, what applications they can run, what devices they can plug in to share data, if it's encrypted or not. So there's really a lot of moving parts, but the easiest way to kind of break any of that security is from the user themselves. They have access to the data, they have access to the network, so we've got to find ways to prevent them from causing those sorts of problems. Now, to circle back on the idea of data breaches, the way that they occur today, you could stop 9 out of 10 of them. So if we look at this pyramid and how we can kind of focus our efforts a little bit better than what traditional AV is doing up at the top, when we look at that 400,000 new pieces of malware per day, a lot of that is focused on data breaches, right? They're trying to exfiltrate data that is useful to them. If they're not making money directly through ransomware and revenue there, they're making money by selling off PII, payment cards, any number of things. Now, 9 out of 10 data breaches could be stopped the way that they occur today by just preventing the use of exploits. Now, in order to do that, unfortunately, you're talking about patching 6,800 vulnerabilities per year, which anyone who just has to manage Windows updates knows that that's a particularly unrealistic expectation. Sometimes you don't know what applications are out there if users have admin rights that have installed their own programs. Other times, again, as I mentioned before, you have application compatibility or conflicts where you can't push out certain patches. I know that's especially the case in healthcare, which is at the top of that list of the most commonly targeted, because they have systems that can't necessarily run the latest patches, that can't be rebooted on demand. But then the other consequence, the other challenge here with those 6,800 vulnerabilities per year is sometimes those vulnerabilities get announced hundreds of days before the patch that protects them is actually available. Now, the exploit methods, we've started to really target in on those, because what's interesting there is when you look at the exploit methods, those don't change nearly as frequently as the threats or the malware that's targeting those exploits. So you look at the top of the stack and there's those 500,000 files per day, but the exploit methods only change tens of times per year. I've been doing computer security since 2001, and one of the first things that I learned was kind of how to pick apart systems, how to hack into them to learn how to better defend them. Buffer overflows were a technique that I learned way back in the day, and one of the targets that we would commonly try to test how strong servers were configured and how they were patched. Buffer overflows were a thing then. They're still a thing today. The techniques don't change nearly as frequently as the files do. So by focusing in on the exploit methods and preventing the exploits from running, that's a huge thing that we can do to create a much smaller moving target that becomes an easier way to protect the machines. Now, we've introduced, Sophos has introduced 2 different technologies to combat those exploits. One is manageable through our on-premise product, and one is manageable through our cloud-based product. But at the end of the day, it's either endpoint exploit prevention or InterceptX. Those are the 2 names. They work off a completely signatureless approach, and by focusing on the exploits, we're able to catch much better results at 0 day and 0 minute. So Petya and WannaCry, that both just happened within the last couple of weeks, for example, we issue updates to those antivirus definitions so that everyone's protected against those things. But if you were running endpoint exploit prevention or InterceptX, an anti-exploit technology, we were catching those things at minute 0, no update required. So there's a lot of different techniques that are out there. We look at 24, which is more than any other vendor we are aware of, but it's important to not just look at things from an antivirus perspective and a file-based perspective, but to actually look at the prevention of these particular exploit families. And again, you can do that by making sure everything's patched, and that's a great way to minimize the potential for a lot of these threats, but you can also supplement that with anti-exploit technology. We also do something interesting around cryptography, which is if something happens to slip through the cracks, if something isn't identified as a virus, if it's not identified as using an exploit, and that's very possible if you think of a particular example like this. If I crafted a malicious script, it's not necessarily a piece of virus, it's not a piece of malware, but that script might use something open source like 7-zip or WinRAR. It might encrypt and archive files, then delete the original. It's not necessarily a bad thing, and it's not malware. if it's giving you the key at the end of the day, but if it's sending it to the malware writer instead, that's a huge problem. And it doesn't have to use an exploit if the user has rights to run it and if the user has access to the data that it wants to encrypt. So in that particular case, we have CryptoGuard, which backs up the data on box. It's not stored in the cloud. And if something encrypts the data, we're able to roll back the damage, kill off the process that's doing the encryption. And it's a rolling cache as well, too. So new files come in, old files go out. You don't have this huge, unmanageable, unruly backup on the machine, but it's a great way to protect against ransomware, even when it slips through the cracks of those other detection mechanisms. The other thing that I had mentioned earlier on was kind of the how, and that's a huge piece towards understanding how to prevent these things from happening in the future. If I know that I caught a piece of malware, great, but how do they get onto my machine? So with the how, we can say, this came in through Chrome, the user was just browsing, going about their day, eventually landed on a bad website. Or you can see that Outlook was the root cause, and Outlook spawned Chrome because they clicked on a link in an email. Or maybe Outlook spawned Adobe or Word because they opened a particular attachment. So by looking at root cause analysis and understanding the how of how did that come to be on the machine, how did it get there, how did it run its code, now I can go back and I can modify the firewall, I can modify my web or my email filter, or if it's the same user that's doing things again and again, maybe we need to educate them, maybe we need to give them access to read-only file readers instead of something that can modify the file and put them at less risk. So there's lots of things we can do when we understand the how. Now we can react and change accordingly so that we're not falling into that same trap again and again. If we catch something once, we'd prefer not to have to catch it again by adjusting our security policy accordingly. Now, how do we win, basically? How do we beat the malware writers and those malicious intent? Well, there's a couple key things you can do. You can deploy patches as quickly as possible. That's such an important step. Eliminate any unnecessary applications by limiting what users can run. Preferably, we'd always run as a non-privileged user, so we don't want anyone logging in as admin whenever possible, including our admins. They should have a regular account and then log out and log in as an admin when they need to do administrative duties. Increasing employee awareness is a huge part of it, because if you remember from that slide before, we can put the best security in place, but the users have access to the data. And if the users have access to that, and if they have rights to run applications, then we can run into all sorts of problems. By recognizing our weak points as well, too, we know what we need to strengthen or limit access to, and all of that really attributes to reducing the threat surface. The less applications, the less devices, the less access things have, the less potential there is for leaks and problems. But that's kind of a quick glance at how malware writers target and why. There's a ton of money to be made when it comes to malware today. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry, and as long as there is that kind of money in the mix, there's no signs of it slowing or stopping, unfortunately. So the best thing we can do is educate ourselves, protect our end users, and protect our systems as best as possible. But that's kind of my portion. So let me know if you have any questions. I'll be here as we're going through some of the rest of the presentation. But thanks for taking your time to listen to that. Appreciate it.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Justin. And again, remember, anybody can write a question in on the Q&A down below in your bottom left of your controls. So feel free to write us a question if you've got anything that you'd like Justin or anybody to further elaborate on. At this point, what we'd love to do is throw it over to Paul O'Donnell, who's going to continue on the conversation with the next phase of managed services and cybersecurity. So Paul, are you there?
I am, thank you. And thank you, Justin, for a great overview of Sophos. So we did just hear from Justin from Sophos on why their products would be the right fit for your company. I'd like to take some time to talk about what to do if you don't have the right IT resources to manage those day-to-day operations that he spoke of. Patch management, for example, something we'll talk a little bit more in-depthly about. But why might managed services for cybersecurity be right for your organization? Oftentimes we speak with organizations that have their own internal IT department, but that IT department is small and they don't have the bandwidth to manage necessary updates. A managed services organization can come in and complement, not supplant, that existing IT staff to increase their bandwidth and make them more operationally efficient. Oftentimes, again, especially in the SMB space, there's no technical staff and the business owner has no idea where to start. So a managed service provider can come in and be that subject matter expert. Managed services can be an extension of your security operation if you're a larger enterprise organization seeking a more advanced managed security service offering 24/7 support. And oftentimes, geographically disparate organizations such as franchises, restaurant groups, hotels, organizations that have multiple locations could utilize a central hub, if you will, for their managed IT security and their managed services, and that's where a solid managed service provider can come into play. Taking that a step further, what types of offerings do managed service providers offer? You see a few listed here: proactive management and support, threat intelligence, 24/7, 365 support, and dedicated staff. Again, you can look at the list here, but I just want to stress, and I can't stress enough that managed IT services do not eliminate IT problems and failures. They automate functions that anticipate and resolve operational IT issues. And managed service providers that not only provide them with reporting on how well their systems are performing, but we are also able to effectively resolve issues when they occur. And managed IT services are about much more, however, than just reducing costs by deferring operations, administration, and maintenance to third parties. Perhaps most importantly, MSPs enable their customers to redirect valuable resources and personnel to revenue-producing areas. And given that many modern MSPs operate using a subscription-based model in which the provider is engaged in an ongoing relationship with the end client, the success of the MSP is contingent upon the customer perceiving true value from their IT assignment. So again, going back to that portion from the beginning of increasing internal bandwidth if you have an existing IT staff, or being that go-to person, that go-to organization, should you not have an idea where to start. So kind of a high-level overview there of the types of offerings that managed services can provide and ingrain into your organization. Now I'd like to take patch management a step further. So Justin touched on patch management a little bit. He talked about Patch Tuesday, and I believe he called it Exploit Wednesday. So we're going to talk a little bit today about what Patch Tuesday is and how we as a managed service provider go through testing those patches and making sure that they're successfully rolled up and released into your environment. So as Justin had so eloquently put, patching is a very important service that we provide to our clients, to help keep their software secure, up to date, and running efficiently. However, new patches often cause issues with existing applications, which can create additional work for your team and result in lost productivity in your environment. To avoid these problems, it's important to thoroughly test new patches before deploying them. And to help reduce the number of issues experienced when installing Microsoft's monthly security patch roll-up, our technicians are going to conduct an extensive testing to identify any errors or conflicts with existing applications so that we can provide a more efficient and comprehensive patching service to our clients. So again, here's an overview of our Windows security patch roll-up testing process. So on day one, which is Patch Tuesday, Microsoft releases their monthly security patch roll-up. It's the second Tuesday of each month, and at this time, we delay the installation of this roll-up for 2 weeks in order to thoroughly test how the installation impacts common business applications. On day 11, which is when the patch testing is completed, we publish a report that lists any issues we've identified, and if it's applicable, we provide steps to avoid or remediate the issue. This report also includes any previously blacklisted patches that would be included in the monthly roll-up. Then finally, on day 14, the patch roll-up is released. So 14 days after the roll-up is made available, it's marked as tested and made available for download and installation according to your existing patch policies. If significant and or extensive issues are found with the patch roll-up, we may delay the release of that roll-up beyond day 14 to better prepare and minimize the impact on our clients. So all that sounds fun and good, but what are the benefits of patch roll-up testing. So patch management, can be a very time-consuming process for both us as your managed service provider and you as our end clients. And by delaying the installation of Microsoft's monthly security patch roll-up, our team is able to extensively test the different patches within the roll-up on your behalf, helping you identify and remediate issues before they happen and provide a better overall patching service to our clients. Additionally, delaying the installation provides other software vendors with time to release updates that fix known issues, giving you a better chance at avoiding additional problems altogether. Our job as your managed service provider is to minimize your technology issues so that you can keep your business running smoothly. With our patch testing process, you don't just get a patch management tool, but you get a complete team that enables you to provide a better patching service to your network. And with that, I'll turn it back over if there are any questions.
All right. So any questions from anyone in the audience on either the managed services portion of this and patch roll-up testing, or what we had from Justin with Sophos? If anybody has any questions, please feel free to do so. I actually have a question while we're waiting for stuff to populate, but I have a question for Justin. There was quite an arc of number of attacks that were happening. Sometimes in the software world, people will say, well, there is a plateau that people will hit where the number of software applications, let's say, to saturate a particular market will reach a plateau, and then eventually a bunch will die off and you'll hit a normal amount of software that can be used. In the world of malware or attacks, do you see any potential of a slowing down or a plateauing of the number of attacks that occur out there in the world each day? Or will it continue on its skyrocketing course?
I mean, at least for the foreseeable future, it shows exponential growth, and there's no reason for them to slow down, because the more they throw out there, the more money they can generate. So they'll continue to target the platforms that are working for them. They'll continue to target other platforms. And as we, as a society, rely more and more on computing, cloud-based infrastructures, we have our personal data, our banking data. There's just so much money that's in the mix, and there's so much valuable information out there that as long as that continues to be a trend, targeting that is going to continue to be a trend as well too. And it doesn't show any signs of slowing down. In fact, it over the recent years only shows signs of it exponentially increasing, which is why we need to start targeting things a little bit differently and start combating them, not in the ways that we used to, but really looking at security as a moving, dynamic, infrastructure in its own.
Sure. And in terms of one of the things that you had brought up was size of organization. And this can really speak to, I guess, both presenters here, but there are times where organizations are small to medium size. Let's say if you're a business, or let's say you're not flush with cash, you are a school district, a government agency, let's say. There may be a feeling of, oh my goodness, this is just too overwhelming or too big to even attempt to start. But that seems like there has to be solutions for all levels, I guess, of organizations out there to help protect themselves. And I guess I'm asking, is there hope and an ability to help overstrapped or underfunded organizations even have a chance at avoiding these attacks?
I mean, avoiding them is probably unrealistic. Reducing the attack surface, minimizing, how susceptible you are to these attacks is a big part of it, because there will always be lower hanging fruit. There will always be companies that don't have good protection in place, that don't have, some education passed on to the workforce. That, if you don't have the patches applied, somebody else is always an easier target, but you'll never completely avoid it. And, we're seeing a big uptick in the number of small businesses that are targeted, for example. So it really is a situation where any opportunity to make money those malware writers are going to try. And again, not being the lowest hanging fruit is probably one of the biggest things that you can do to make sure that you're at least safer than some of the other people that might be targeted by similar attacks or by active adversaries.
Yeah, I'll echo that, what Justin said, and I'll take it a step further. Not being the low-hanging fruit, we use the analogy that if somebody's looking to rob a house, they're not going to go to the one with the doors locked, but if they want to get in, they're going to get in at some point. Just make sure your door's locked. Make sure your patches are properly deployed. Make sure you have the right antivirus put in place, anti-malware protection, so that they go on to the next door that might be open, might be more susceptible. In the end, we had a great graphic earlier around data security with the cartoon imagery, where we had firewalls, encryption, antivirus, so on and so forth in one corner, and then in the other corner, we have human error. And human error is by far and above the largest influencer on susceptibility to ransomware and intrusion. So I would say educating your end users far and above is your best route. If you're using the other services as well, your best route to avoid an impact. But also, something we kind of talked a little bit about but didn't really dive into too deep is having an effective backup and disaster recovery strategy as well. Having your core data properly backed up and in a restorable format. Should you be breached, I can't tell you how many clients we've worked with that they do get a breach, they do get their data encrypted, and we say so what, and we restore from a recoverable point, maybe from the previous day, and it's not a total loss or a total wash. Having all of this data security paired up with a sufficient backup and disaster recovery solution is your most surefire way to prevent yourself from incurring a data loss and experiencing downtime. Right? Nobody has the budget for downtime. We talked a little bit about budget around these types of a solution. I would turn the question and ask, what's your budget for downtime? What impact does it have on your business or your organization if you can't send or receive emails for an hour, a day, a week? What's that financial impact, and where does that leave you operationally?
That's absolutely correct. It's not even just the outlay of, let's say, ransom for ransomware, but it's how long are people standing around? And then, as always is going to be the case, if somebody's got personal information, when do the lawsuits come? Or interruption of business. So all great points, absolutely. Well, if we don't have any other questions, then I would love to thank both Paul and Justin for jumping on board today and sharing their insight with us. I also just want to remind everybody that is on the webinar today, Unified is here to help as well, to be a great partner, and to answer a lot of the questions. There's so many questions about security that it's difficult to do sometimes in a virtual space, but one-on-one, to be able to sit down with you guys and offer the solutions that we can, it's a great first step in getting a lot of peace of mind, and as Paul had just stated, continuing your business, continuing your operations, continuing the work of your school district or of your town or county government. So we want you all to be safe, secure, operational. So feel free to give us a call to further this discussion and really, really get you to fully secure. Thank you, everybody. We look forward to having you on our next webinar, which will be announced shortly. Until then, take care.